So it's still flying high, Sunset Games 101. I'm here to talk to you all about Sunset Games. And for those of you that don't know what Sunset Games are, that's pretty much what I'm going to cover. They're these kind of incremental games that we've worked on for quite a while, and we've seen a lot of success that has sustained over a long period of time with a large number of the Sunset Games that we've launched. So why don't I get started? What are Sunset Games? So they are typically a runner-like experience where you find yourself kind of chasing the sunset. So you're going through this core gameplay loop over and over again, which is kind of centralized around collecting resources or collecting money at the end of a run, and then improving and upgrading your player character. Usually you start from the same location, run again, earn some currency, spend that on upgrades that typically can kind of increase your travel distance, allow you to upgrade to earn better rewards, or interact more or in a different way with the game world that you're kind of playing through and launching through with each of these runs. So this kind of idea of chasing the sunset and seeing what's around the corner becomes the driving motivator of the game, encouraging players to get better at exploring the world ahead and continue to upgrade to see what's around the corner, what's just over the horizon, what's that kind of interesting thing that I can see that I want to kind of explore and find. And there are multiple ways of doing it, and typically you want to explore things like distance, so new environments and new exciting things to see and to experience as you get further through the level, but also kind of verticality in this sense of scale, so it feels like you're making your choices in upgrading and your kind of strategy for playing the game gives this sense of achievement in how you're approaching the game, and you're kind of tackling this massive world and clearly getting better and better each time. So some of the games that we've launched, Sunset Games that we've launched, include Blast City, Jetpack Jump, and Rocket Sky. So what are Sunset Games about? You start off small. You are typically making a very short run. You're kind of bursting into this exciting world with a relatively weak character, and you're struggling to make much ground, but you're earning currency as you're trying. So every time you run, you get a bit more currency. You're able to start upgrading, and then through that persistence, you start to upgrade your character, and you're maybe like adding engines to a plane, or you're adding roller skates to your character, or improving like your jump distance and your jetpack in Jetpack Jump, for example. That then means you can make it further into the world with each try. And there's, with a sense of like an intriguing enough world and a promise that to the player that they don't exactly know what's coming, Sunset Games provide this really addictive kind of core gameplay loop where you don't know what's coming, whether it's a wacky upgrade that you didn't expect, or whether there's something really interesting about the world that you're exploring and seeing more of. So essentially, you start off small, start to improve and upgrade, and then the more you play, the higher the reward you get. Not only because you're traveling further and earning more with each run, but also you're seeing more of the world. You're getting more of a sense of satisfaction from the choices that you've made. So every run is typically rewarded in a Sunset Game. There's no real punishment or loss, and it leads to this kind of persistent gameplay from players. So they keep coming back to improve and improve and improve, and it builds on this sense of satisfaction of like, wow, I'm really making a dent in this. I'm making it further and further through this world. They're essentially these kind of hyper casual roguelites with each run, like giving you more progress and more of an opportunity to explore through that world. And then the more you explore, the more you see something interesting on the horizon. So what is it that I find so great about them? I think there's a few things. So there's this light sense of decision making. It keeps the gameplay engaging. Like you're eking out when you use your fuel, for example, or what objects you want to hit into to give you a boost, so that you get the most benefit from it as a player. You're thinking about how to optimize your approach. You're kind of min-maxing your upgrades to make sure that you get as far as possible and earn as much as possible, and then going through that loop again and upgrading and feeling the satisfaction that you've earned that. There's a lot of flexibility with Sunset Games. So in terms of design and approach, there's a formula that can fit many themes. If you can find a theme that engages an audience quite well, you can apply this kind of Sunset Game concept to it, with these upgrades that are relevant to the game world and what your kind of character is doing. It allows you to kind of be flexible in your approach to games, and it's something that you could try with prototypes that maybe haven't had the gameplay performance that you were hoping for. And from a gameplay perspective, they're not punishing at all. Every run gives a reward. They're quite satisfying to play in that respect. You constantly get this sense of reward, this sense of success from achieving more and more. So light decision making in Sunset games. Typically, Sunset games are filled with kind of light, impactful decisions. A big part of what makes these games so compelling is giving players these light decisions to significant and kind of connected interactions. These interactions that are connected to the game world, where like with every tap, it feels like there's some sense of impact, and you're having a big impact on what's happening in the game. So the journey of obviously this sense of adventure plays a massive part in what makes these games so compelling. But you still need to allow your players these light choices to keep them engaged. For instance, it's one thing to have a really compelling kind of run-up section, and then you could end up just kind of sat there watching the game play out, right? Typically, you want to aim for something where you have this fun interaction up front that's quite punchy, and then while you're in motion, you have this sense of kind of light decision making, this freedom of choice, where you're kind of balancing something out to get the optimum result. And these, like all of these interactions, should kind of ensure that the player feels connected to the game world and what they're doing in that game world, and feel like they're impacting their performance in the game. So in Jetpack Jump, for example, a lot of thought and care went into making sure that the VFX, the camera movement, and the timing all come together to make each of these kind of steps as you're jumping feel impactful, like a little explosion at your feet. And then this sense of like the camera panning up as you take off and showing you more of the world, showing you this kind of horizon that curves around, and showing you that there's always something else to see, there's always something else to discover, helps to keep players engaged, helps to keep them thinking, oh, I want to see what's over there, I want to hit that point. So combining those kind of key moments in the core gameplay with that upgrade loop that keeps people coming back, and that enticing kind of visual of what's just around the corner, what's over the horizon, that's typically what keeps these games engaging for players and pushes for strong engagement, and it usually ends up in these games monetizing really effectively. Now let's talk a bit about loss in Sunset games. Typically, Sunset games will shy away from punishing players for bad runs. So you kind of replace this loss condition with the promise that every run gets you something, and that something is you can use to do better next time. So the primary satisfaction of these games is this reward-oriented design that focuses on enhancing common gameplay and these common gameplay elements to augment that experience. In Jetpack Jump, for example, no matter how far you travel, you're rewarded with cash relative to your performance, which you can then use to buy upgrades to help yourself perform better. And then that then ties back into the key principle of obviously not punishing players and continuously rewarding them. With Go Fish, for example, you're collecting fish and then upgrading your hook to be able to collect more fish. And you're earning something with every run, even if you miss the most valuable fish. So the key takeaway there is just don't punish the player. Keeping players engaged. So there are a few key areas in Sunset games that will enable you to keep players engaged. One is building this compelling world for your concept. So really it needs to kind of fit the theme and be something that entices people to explore it. With Go Fish, for example, that is this idea of lots of different types of exotic fish that you can almost collect them, right? You get shown that, all right, you've caught this fish, you've caught this fish, but you haven't caught this one yet. And seeing all of that as you get deeper, seeing that there's more different types of fish to find is constantly engaging. There's this sense of, all right, what other fish am I going to find? What's around the corner? And then with Jetpack Jump, for example, it's this sense of, what is that over on the horizon? I kind of want to see that little environment. I want to see what's going on there. I want to see how that's been set up. I want to discover this world, and I want to see if I can ever reach the end of it. In addition to that, there's always needs to be a sense of kind of intuitive and accessible control. So making sure that players can easily and intuitively play the core gameplay loop of your game. It's easy to understand, and that's a core tenet of hyper casual, right? Is these intuitive and accessible controls. And the final point here is meaningful upgrades. So making sure that the upgrades you're offering to players feel like they have some sense of meaning, some sense of impact in the game world, and allow for this feeling of improved success, this feeling of essentially like this feeling of power where you're building up and you've gone from this little guy who's kind of like hopping a few times and then boosting himself and then falling flat to the point where you're launching yourself over the world that you've already seen, and then you're getting closer and closer to these new areas and new places that you're kind of excited to explore. So flexibility. I mentioned this briefly earlier. Typically, you can have a short prototyping phase with this. You can build out a core gameplay loop, and you don't need to worry too much about level design. You don't need to worry too much about building out this flow of different levels and this difficulty curve, because you can do that with your upgrades and the distance and the height you're allowing people to reach. And as I mentioned before, there's one formula for Sunset games that you can apply to many themes, and try and hit the nail on the head, essentially, and find the right kind of combination of theme and upgrades that match well and allow for this engaging gameplay experience. So to summarize, the crucial points about Sunset games, they're about adventure. So you're allowing players to explore this world. You're allowing players to earn as they do that, so they are constantly getting rewarded for this flow. Those earnings then allow the player to push further, right? They enable this progress where you are upgrading more, you're traveling further, you're upgrading more, traveling further, upgrading more, and constantly being rewarded along the way, whether that's with more upgrades and more currency to upgrade with, or whether it's with like unlockables and cosmetics, like little hats or little touches that allow you to kind of personalize your game and feel invested in that gameplay experience. So that progress unlocks the new content, and then the new content allows you kind of more new horizons to explore. So here's a few Sunset games made by us: Rocket Sky, Jetpack Jump, and Go Fish. We also have quite an exciting thing coming up. We will be running a Sunset Games Game Jam. It's kicking off in March, so middle of March. It's going to run for 3 weeks. We'll run a kickoff webinar and share some more information and more kind of key coaching on hyper casual Sunset games. There'll be rewards, and we'll share more info about that very soon. And that is, excuse me, that's me. Thank you very much for having me. I'm sticking around for the Q&A, but I will stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, hello again. We're back. Thank you so much for your speech. It was really amazing and interesting. Let me check what we have from guys in chat. But before I take any of that questions online, I'd like to use my right as a moderator and ask you about trending. What is trending, and how you implement something trending that you see on the market into this approach you have just shared about? How do you connect them?
Gotcha. I think so. There's a lot of kind of interesting themes that are trending at the moment. One is this sense of kind of hybrid casual arcade idle games, and I think there's a sense that you could enable like a Sunset game element within that game. I think there's a couple of things that are really interesting about Sunset games. One is the fact that yardsticks exist, these kind of segments at the end of like a runner or a core game where you have this section where you're trying to get as far as possible. And there's kind of elements of that you can pull into this, right? As you're running through a runner or you're running through a level, you can build up this stack of stuff, and then that is what you're using at the end to kind of make sure that you get better. I think this sense of constant kind of reward in Sunset games, and it's kind of turned up to 11 in Sunset games, right? That's something that these yardsticks are really leaning into, these kind of end moments where you get this big kind of celebratory payoff, and then you move to the next level. The other thing I mentioned was kind of like hybrid casual games where you're running around collecting resources, like almost like an active idle game. Maybe there's this idea that you could build something where you constantly do one run of something. There's this sense, it's kind of like this pulled back sense of you're doing the same thing over and over again and upgrading and constantly getting better and better and better. And you see this sense of reward as you're building that up. So maybe building on that, Sunset games that have this kind of hub where you're building stuff up and you have this passive income, and then you can launch yourself off and fly through the sky.
Thank you so much. Okay. Let's assume I'm a developer on the market. I have some good games, not hits, but I can do something. Why should I choose Kwalee to cooperate with?
So Kwalee pride ourselves on working with developers quite closely and providing the best feedback we can to developers. So we're not only here to be kind of money men essentially, where we're funding the UA, although that's something that we have teams and experts that are able to kind of support the UA and monetization of these games. We're in a position to allow kind of direct feedback on individual games, and every game that gets submitted to Kwalee, somebody looks at, somebody plays, and we'll be able to, even if it doesn't kind of move ahead, we'll give direct feedback on. We're working with developers in kind of a very direct way where we're catching up almost daily and talking through ideas, talking through not only the ideas that we see trending, but also kind of using that as a starting point for ideation with developers and brainstorming these new concepts and exciting ideas. I think Kwalee as a company, even before they were a publisher, have always had this really strong culture of creativity and have kind of fostered that in everybody on the team and everybody on the publishing team to encourage working in that way with developers. Go on.
Yeah. Do you teach developers on how to ideate, on how to become more creative?
Yeah. So there's like, it's a tricky thing, right? Because not all the ideas just kind of pop into your head. Like everyone has ideas that kind of pop into their head, but how do you formalize that process, right? So there's an element of kind of sitting down and working through like how we formalize this process of ideation and creativity to make sure that it's not so kind of confined and restrained that like, all right, I can't come up with anything in these kind of scenarios, but we're allowing for like, all right, this is how to be creative and think of big ideas and be able to kind of throw ideas around and then refine them, kind of work through, all right, what kind of key elements can we take from this and build it into something that is a great hyper casual game. And it's something that you have to kind of learn sometimes, right? You have to build that understanding of like, okay, how do I think everybody goes through that period of like, oh, how do I come up with ideas? I can't just sit here and think of them straight away because historically I've just kind of realized something in the shower. But there's a way to structure that so that you kind of keep coming back to these ideas and then refining them to the point where you've got something that's great.
Absolutely. The main trick is to get this process more controlled because earlier or later you come to the point when you have to generate ideas at the moment you need them, and you can't rely on randomness. You need to know how to run this process, how to push it out.
Yeah. And like to an extent, part of that is almost like gathering resources, right? Like looking at the world, experiencing things, reading different things, playing different games that are out there, whether they're hyper casual or not, and then pulling in these elements that are engaging and fun, and understanding what makes that fun, what is it about that I like that feels like it fits well to a certain theme. So you kind of build up those resources and then match them up. You find the right combination of those kind of tools that you've got that then builds into this idea for a hyper casual game.
Absolutely. Okay. Next question, which I have: how do you test the prototypes? Meaning, everyone buys some traffic and sees some numbers, but how many users do you buy, and do you use other approaches as well, like user testing, not just statistic or something else?
Yeah. So there's a fair amount of user testing that we do where we're kind of playing with family and friends and showing people these games and getting an idea for how engaging it is on like on a kind of small scale level. And also when we're running our user acquisition campaigns in the very early stages where we're looking at CPI, it always depends on how engaging the game is, how many users that you actually acquire. It's typically not a set number of users that you're getting into the game, but you want to be looking at a few hundred to understand that there's enough users in there to get a good sense of, all right, this is how engaging the gameplay is. This is an accurate percentage of people that are coming back day one. This is an accurate understanding of how long those people are playing the game for. So I think in terms of our testing process, I think a lot of publishers are doing quite similar things, right? They're running these initial campaigns to get an early feel for it. And then we zone into like, what's the right area to focus on? Like maybe the gameplay is really great and people are really engaged, but it's really hard to get users in. So the focus then should be marketing. How do we make the game a bit more marketable? How do we make the game look more engaging in a really short period of time? Or on the flip side, you've got a game that looks really engaging and people are super excited and they're installing it. how do you make that fun once they're in there? Are they leaving straight away because they're just not enjoying that core gameplay loop? Is it a case of polishing and refining that, or taking this kind of core essence of what you're showing in the ad and then adapting the game to make it feel more like what that looks like it plays like, if that makes sense?
So your producers bring that knowledge to me as a developer, what to do next. Do they give advices?
Yes. Yeah. So they'll definitely give advice. It's typically not the case that we'll say, well, this is the kind of thing that you need to do. Go away and do it. If a developer's kind of open to that discussion, we'll be in a position to say, like, we've got an internal development studio that we can lean on for this support. And it's not necessarily a case that we're saying, okay, we'll get these guys to make it. It's the case that we're going to these guys like, all right, we've got this, like, this is what we want to achieve. This is the feeling that we want to get with the game. How would you guys approach it? And then we can kind of take that advice, give it to the developer. And essentially a lot of what I see publishers doing, like as a publisher, what I see we should be doing is coaching developers and supporting them in kind of working towards this level of polish that we're seeing in so many games now, right? And that's not a case of saying, well, this is the level of polish you need. Here you go. But it's a case of saying, this is the level of polish you need, and here are some ways that you might be able to get there.
Something absolutely amazing, actually. Okay, thank you. The next question we have, what are the KPIs for publishing with Kwalee?
So typically our first test is a CPI test, and we're looking at a 30-cent CPI on iOS. This is essentially to kind of move it through really quickly. If there's a higher CPI on iOS in the early stages, there's a lot of other factors that we look at to kind of consider whether it's worth iterating on that concept, and whether there's something else there that we can zone into, as I mentioned before, that allows us to kind of build out from there. And if we're going through that process, that's kind of looking at that early stage 30-cent CPI, and then moving on to looking at 30% day one retention and 15 minutes played on the first day. So those are the things that, like, you hit those straight away, we'll move very quickly to the publishing contract. You're not quite there with any of those, but there's some really solid signs. We'll work with you to iterate the game. We'll coach you. We'll kind of work with our design guys, our development guys, and our whole team essentially to get feedback, get guidance, and find the right way to make that game a hit.
Thank you. Here is the most unformalized area, I believe, on where you have to decide to kill the prototype or to iterate it. How do you take that hard decision?
It's always a difficult decision, but the thing that makes it easier every time is looking at the data and being confident in the data that you've got. So, like, if we know that all three of those kind of metrics are really bad, right? It's got a really high CPI, nobody's sticking around to play it, nobody's playing for very long. Typically, it's going to be so much more work to rescue that than it would be to make something else, test it, and see that it's got one of these metrics higher. So it's really at the point where you're like, okay, there's not really anything we can do. And sometimes you'll see a game that is close on one of these metrics, but the other ones fall short. And you start going through the process of kind of brainstorming on what you can iterate on, but you hit this wall where you're like, no, there's really nothing here that hasn't already been tried or would improve it enough to make a big difference. So there's a lot of judgment calls at that point on, okay, is it the right choice to make? And I think one of the things that I'm really proud of at Kwalee is the development heritage that we've got means that there's this massive respect for not only like the team's time that are working on the games internally, but also the developers that we're working with. This respect for the time of development that is required to get to a point to test something out.
Thank you so much. This moment is really crucial, I believe, for many guys with their lovely ideas in the market. Okay, good. I believe this is it. We're running out of time we had. Thank you so much for coming and sharing all that knowledge and answering pretty hard questions from our audience.
No worries.
We appreciate it. Thank you very much and have a great day.
You too.